started, Mike, you all set? Okay. Good evening, everybody. We have a nice, intimate group, bigger than last year, but happy that there are people here. I think there are others will join us for our virtual meeting later on after the break. I think I know everybody here, so I don't need to introduce myself. I do want to call out that Mary Manning from the school committee is here, who is also the chair of the finance subcommittee. And so I think it's really curious with the input that people have to share here tonight. And so we just have a couple, we try to limit how much talking at you, but we would like to have a conversation about a couple key questions. This is a very, very unusual budget year because, and I know Elizabeth will go through this in a second, but we have, the governor's budget hasn't even come out yet because it's a change of administration, and so they have more time. Normally by this time, we would have the governor's budget and have a sense of how much we are projected to get from the state, whether that's going up or down. We really don't know right now. And also, we have new leadership at the city level as well, and we have an interim mayor. So that, all of those things I think is going to make this a pretty interesting budget year. We also don't anticipate that we're going to be getting a lot of new funding for this year, and I think we've sent the message to our schools already that they should be thinking about shifting how they use resources if there's different priorities, rather than thinking that there's going to be new money. Our enrollment, while it did bump back up a little bit, is still declined over time. We have all the federal relief money going to dry out at the end of this year. The ESSER money, the stimulus funding that came with COVID is starting to dwindle. And so we don't anticipate an influx of new funding, and so we're preparing to be pretty conservative in this budget process. Now things could change based on what we see from the state or the city, but right now that's how we're messaging to our schools as they prepare. We don't want to wait for the governor's budget because then it'll be too late in the process. So I do want to introduce our new assistant superintendent, finance and operations. I guess she's not so new anymore, Elizabeth Pauley, and she's going to do a lot of this presentation, but we're going to talk to you a little bit about, just quickly, our strategy and values, talk a little bit about the budget context, but we really want to have a discussion, and then we'll hopefully have a debrief. We'll probably break out into two groups. I don't know, it depends on what the size looks like here, and then we'll get you out of here on time, I promise you that. Last year when we did this, when we had the budget process, we did not have core values as a system. I think ultimately, we have to make decisions in line to what our values are around belonging, equity, and opportunity, and this is what I will continue to push with our school leaders and with our school committee, that we make decisions around what we have adopted collectively as our core values around the work we want to do with our young people in schools, right? So I think it all starts with your values and priorities, and budget should always be a reflection of those. And so those are part of what we're going to have plenty of conversations with schools and with the school committee and the community throughout this process. We're starting our conversations with schools Friday morning, and so this will come up a lot in our discussions with them. We also have a clear equity statement that was adopted 2 years ago that continues to drive the decisions we make. I think at times we fall away from our equity, and I sent out our equity goals, and we want to make sure that we're doing equity doesn't mean equal. It doesn't mean that every school is going to get an equal amount. There are places in the district where we feel strongly that there needs to be bigger investment or different investment based on the unique needs of the students and the populations of students that they serve. And so I want to make sure that that's, we have schools in all different places. We need to use our resources in a way that reflects our commitment to making sure that we're making sure that those that need the most get the most. And that's sometimes hard for people to hear. And but I think as a system, as the school committee's been pretty clear that that's important to them as we enter a budget process. And now, hopefully, we've come out of COVID. it was a little bit of a wild couple of years for obvious reasons, and now we really have to, it's time to really make sure that we're doing right by every child in the school system. These are the current priorities and initiatives that we have. We're in the process of redoing our strategic plan right now, so some of this could change, but when I arrived, I worked with the community as part of my entry plan, and these were the 4 priorities that we had at the time: educator development, academic excellence, strong support systems, and strategic and efficient systems. Those were the big buckets, and then we had initiatives related to these 12 different areas. And all our schools' improvement plans are aligned to these, and as we, again, enter this budget season, these will loom large. I mean, it shouldn't be a surprise to you. We've invested a lot in pre-K over the last few years. We've spent a lot of time thinking about the high school redesign process. We've invested a lot in our CTE programs that are really booming here. We've talked a lot about building a diverse workforce. We've invested resources there. We've done a lot of work with professional development about culturally responsive and linguistically responsive teaching. And so a lot of the SEL has been a focus, mental health. I expect a lot of these priorities to continue with the revised iteration of the strategic plan, but there's also other areas that I know that will likely emerge as top of mind for people, given what we've seen from the pandemic, that might shift some of these in the coming years. Middle school is an area we talk a lot about. How do we better support our middle school students? We know that, at least I've seen that our middle school students have struggled the most coming out of the pandemic, and so I think it's gonna, I don't wanna I don't wanna predict what people are gonna say, but my guess is, from the conversations I've heard, that we're gonna wanna think about how, the investment in the redesign we've done at the high school has, I think, paid off, but we also have a lot of work to do with the pipelines and the pathways leading into the high school as well. That's just one area that I can anticipate. Mental health, social emotional learning, continue to hear the needs, and we see the acuteness of the demand for even our new partnership with Cartwheel that we have, which is a virtual mental health model. And we've heard repeatedly, right? We've seen the long wait lists and demand for mental health services. So I expect that there'll be even more of an emphasis on some of that. We obviously have, moving forward, this the wonderful opportunity to rebuild the facility here at Salem High School, whatever that is. So I would assume, again, that our strategic plan has to point us towards what a process to make sure that it reflects what the educational vision is for the school system. So those are all things that are, I think, looming, but this is what we currently are using to guide our work. These, I'm not going to read these to you. These are the outcomes that we've attached to our priorities over the last, it's hard to believe, this is my 3rd year here, so 2.5 years here, and these are things that we've been monitoring as key indicators of success. We've done well in some areas. There are areas that we're stuck, and areas that I wish we were further ahead. But this is what we've been holding ourselves accountable to. I've been reporting out. Can you see over there, Lisa? I don't want to be blocking you. Feel free to join us closer if you want. I don't know if you can read from back there, but these are the things that we've cared about. And again, these are likely to change through this new strategic planning process that we're engaging in this spring. I'm going to pass it over to Elizabeth.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. By show of hands, is this your first budget forum? All right, welcome. It's mine too, and so glad to be in this with you. I just wanted to start with some grounding about what our budget is, what makes up our budget, and then some of the context that we're facing this year. So those of you who watch closely know that our budget is $68 million. That is 3.2% more than it was last year. Every year, on average, it goes up about 3.1, 3.2, in the 3 percentage points. Our budget goes up every year. For the math people in the room, you already know that the personnel costs make up 80% of our budget. So our budget is people. That is what we are investing our money in. When I say personnel, that 54 million covers anybody that is getting paid by the Salem Public Schools. So teachers, paras, principals, librarians, custodians, central office people, crossing guards, everybody getting a paycheck from the Salem Public Schools comes under that personnel line. The non-personnel line is everything else. It's the lights, it's the buildings, it's the library books. I'm sorry, I have to play to my library audience here. It's the curriculum, computers, the cleaning supplies. That is the non-personnel. So it's 80-20. Whoops. So what goes into a school budget? Those of you who have been around before know that it is a matter of what are our expenses and what are our revenues. So the first source of revenue that makes up that $68 million budget is local revenue. About 70% of the school's budget comes from the city of Salem. So it's really important to hear from residents, parents, community members, because these are your tax dollars at work. So local revenue is the first main source of funding for the Salem Public Schools. We also get state revenue. And so the aid that we get from the state primarily comes from something called Chapter 70. And undoubtedly you've heard about Chapter 70 before. This is the main way the state gives money to school districts. Briefly, what Chapter 70 does is it establishes, here's what it costs to educate kids in Massachusetts. And then they look at each community, and based on the demographics and the enrollment numbers, it says, this is what it should cost to educate the kids in your school district. Then they look at what they think the community can pay. And the difference is the aid that the state gives through Chapter 70. So it's based on how many kids do you have, what are their demographics and their unique needs, how much can your community afford to pay, and then the state will fill in the gap. Now Salem is a very interesting community in so many ways, but in this one particular way related to Chapter 70, the state looks at Salem and says, you can afford to pay a lot. And so because of our numbers, remember Steve mentioned declining enrollment, and I said that Chapter 70 is first about the number of kids you have and then their unique needs. Because of our declining enrollment and because of our perceived ability to pay to educate those kids, the state actually gives us the minimum amount of aid that it can give a district. So we are what's known as a minimum aid district. So it is critically important that we get this state aid, but it also has been a declining share of our revenue. And so when we think about our revenue, the first is the local aid, the second is the state aid, and I'll come to federal aid in a minute. Steve mentioned that both the local context and the state context are changing, so I think that's part of what makes it complicated this year. The new governor is given more time to prepare her budget, so we don't yet know about state revenue. We have a mayoral race going on, we have an acting mayor in place, and so the city will do what it does, but all of those things make it more complicated than a typical budget year. The last main source of revenue is federal aid. Salem, like many districts, gets many forms of federal aid. Title I, which supports low-income children. Title II, which provides training and development for teachers. But a significant source of federal aid over the last few years has been the $15 million that Salem received in ESSER, which you know is pandemic relief aid. And the things that ESSER has paid for have been things like early childhood teachers and paraprofessionals, tutors, curriculum, cleaning supplies, and HVAC. So it's been a wide range of positions and programs and resources that ESSER has supported. And that is one-time money that will end at the end of next year. So the revenues are unknown, and for tonight, and at this point in the process, we're assuming that the revenue we have will look like what it looks like last year, minus any one-time aid. So we're assuming conservatively that what the state is able to give, what the city is able to give, will look as it has looked in years past. So that is a brief primer on revenue. The other part of our budget is expense. So when we think about expenses, we have fixed costs in the form of people. So 80% of our budget is people. Many of those people work under a collective bargaining agreement, which gives us the advantage of knowing what the salary increase and cost for those people will be year after year. So that is predictable, that is transparent, and we can know that ahead of time. We We also know then that those salaries will go up each year. So that is our main expense. But there are other non-personnel expenses that are also going up. So generally, the largest non-personnel expenses are transportation, utilities, and tuition for students who go out of district to special placements. All of those we anticipate will increase in the next year as costs are going up probably in your personal life as well as for the Salem Public Schools. So we know what our fixed costs are related to people. We know that our contracts for things like transportation and special education will likely increase. And so as we look at revenue that is likely to remain steady or similar to what we have had, and we look at expenses increasing, we're thinking about ways we can continue to prioritize student success. So with all that context, these are the things we're prioritizing in the budget. The first is we want to make sure that our resources are allocated equitably. So are we focusing our resources where they are needed the most for the student success and in the context of declining enrollment for the students who need the resources the most? Are schools and districts, schools and departments aligning their priorities to our North Star and our strategic priorities that Steve showed you a moment ago? We need to make sure that we're all rowing in the same direction. So we start with equity, we make sure we're aligned, and that we're connecting to some of the work that's underway, including the master facilities plan. So how do we think about making the most of our buildings and what that should look like? We want to promote stakeholder engagement. Thank you for being here tonight. That is a really important part of the process. But also all the schools are meeting with their school site councils, there are conversations in departments. So we hope that there'll be many opportunities for conversations about this year's budget, our priorities, and how our budget can be a reflection of our values. We want to make sure we're working hand in hand with school leaders so that where we can be flexible with resources, where they need to be flexible, that is something they're able to do. And importantly, we need to begin thinking about what happens after ESSER. So I think the $15 million has been well spent, but it will end at the end of the next school year. So how do we make sure this year we're beginning to transition away from it so that there's not a giant cliff next year? So that is the context. The relief from the pandemic is sunsetting. We know we have rising costs. So as we prioritize equity, as we prioritize stakeholder engagement and student success, our goal is to end with a level service budget. That does not mean dollar to dollar is equal. What that means is we are able to provide the same level of service next year that we are providing this year. So that is what we are working towards. And we also know with our student enrollment being what it is, and by that I mean who are our students? How many do we have? What needs do they bring? What opportunities do they bring? Where do they find joy and enrichment and engagement? We want to make sure we are able to deliver the services that they need. So we're asking schools to look at their students, prioritize what they need, and think about how they can continue to meet those needs with the resources that they now have. In some instances, that may mean a reduction in the number of positions, but that is what we know now on February 15th, when we don't have a sense of the revenue, when schools haven't finished those conversations with their school site council, with the internal staff, and so the conversations are just at the front end. But I do think it's important to know that we may need to lose some positions. They could be empty, unfilled positions. They could be positions that are being rethought as we aspire to a level service budget in the context of resources that are either flat or declining. There's still a lot we don't know. We don't know about the revenue, so this may change. But I do think it's important at this point to be as conservative as possible.
Can I just jump in there for
Yep.
a second? On that, I think we believe that many of those if we have to cut would be through attrition. Either unfilled positions right now, or the fact that we have turnover, people retiring, folks that are that may be leaving at the end of the year. And I also want to be clear, that includes, that's the central office and schools. We really have not right-sized at all during the pandemic. We lost some students, but even before the pandemic, the district really hadn't adjusted to its enrollment. We have really, really low class sizes in a lot of places. Not all, I don't want to say all, but in some places, like really low as I've seen anywhere in the state. I don't want there to be large class sizes in the Salem Public Schools, but when I look at some of the numbers, we have like we have grade levels with like a full class empty of students when you look at what our class size numbers are. We also have issues with uneven class sizes, especially at the high school. That to me is driven by some scheduling as well. We have classes as low as like 6 students, maybe even less, and then some in the history department that are closer to 30 students and maybe higher. So we have to look at some of that. And I think we're operating, I think at the central office, we also have to shrink a little bit too, if we're asking schools to do that at the same time. So these are all things where, again, we don't know for sure, but we are looking at enrollment. We are looking at unfilled positions that we have right now to make thoughtful decisions. I don't think it's gloom and doom by any stretch, because I do think that we are in a pretty healthy position, and it's really not about people, it's more about positions. I don't want people to think, oh, my job is going to be cut. I think we know we have turnover. The profession as a whole is seeing a lot of turnover, and so it's just something we're planning for. I also think what Elizabeth said that's really important is we want to push our leaders and our school site councils to think creatively about how they use staff, right? It's not just about like adding more people. You can also think about how you use your staff differently to meet your priorities. In some places, it's not about just adding on. It's about, I want to shift some of the resources I have to address a particular need. And that's trying to build that muscle amongst our schools to start thinking about that. Because there isn't like an endless amount of money. We've been fortunate to have ESSER to help us over the last few years, but that is drying out. We have 60 positions on ESSER right now. Now, many of them are tutors and different behavioral specialists and support staff. All of the pre-kindergarten staff is on there, and I'm hoping our friend at Beacon Hill is going to help us to get funding to sustain pre-K, because we can't lose pre-K. It's been such a boon for that, but we have a number of positions there. So to Elizabeth's point, we have to also prepare for that cliff that's coming. We have one more year, but then a year from now, we could be talking about a much bigger cliff around positions that we knew were never going to be here long term, but except that pre-K is something we have committed to long term. So that's the one area I'm most concerned about, and we'll be working very hard to find sources. But I don't want people to leave here and go back to tell all their friends, oh, there's going to be everybody's going to lose their job. That's not what we're saying. We're just we want to be very thoughtful about the fact that we do have the right size for what our enrollment is right now. I see some positive gains. The high school enrollment has gone up by 100 students in the last year. That's a good sign, right? Our enrollment in the elementaries is going down. Birth rates have gone way down. I don't see it's because more kids are going. The charter's already capped at their numbers. I don't see that it's not about charters. People are still picking private schools sort of at similar rates. But the issue is, if you look at the birth rates of like around 2015, much lower than, significant drop, right? And so that's going to have an impact now as those kids come to kindergarten, first grade, and that's where we're seeing smaller numbers.
Yeah, thank you. So where are we? I told you right now we know about expenses, we don't know about revenue. We're starting the process and having the conversations. So we're working to identify the highest priorities for FY24, and we hope you'll help us with that. We know these conversations are happening at schools with school site councils, and the message is, how do you meet the needs of your students? We have a budget forum tonight. Thank you for being here. We have another budget forum on February 27th, which will be online. And we're having a child staff conversation. So we're talking about how are we advancing student success with our budget. March, we will begin doing presentations and having conversations with the school committee's finance subcommittee, and we've been joined by Jim Fleming, and we have Mary Manning here, 2 members of the school committee, with us tonight. So that is part of a larger timeline, and I apologize, I know the font is super small. I was trying to fit it all on one slide. We started creating a budget calendar that would get us to June with a city council approval of a budget. So in October, we established a budget calendar. We began to look at enrollment and salary projections, so having the benefit of knowing what the salary projections are next year and what our student enrollment is based on the October 1. We started to look at that in the fall, in October, November. We started budget conversations with the school committee in December at a retreat. In January, we started talking to schools, giving them a workbook that showed here's what you had last year and the year before. What are your priorities for next year? Schools and departments begin planning for FY24. That's January to February. Hold public budget forums, February 15th and 27th. The finance subcommittee meetings will happen in March 13th, 20th, and 27th. And then we will, from there, from these conversations internally and externally, from the forums, the conversations with the school committee, we will develop a budget recommendations and a final presentation, which will go to the full school committee on May 1. There'll be a hearing the following week on May 8, for the public to weigh in, and then the school committee is scheduled to vote on the FY24 budget on May 15th. The next date, you might know, is the election in the city of Salem. And then we will send the budget over to the new mayor and the city council that week, probably May 19th or the following Monday. And in June, the mayor and the city council will consider our budget and then vote on that for adoption. And it will start on July 1. So it sounds simple, I know, but there's a lot of thinking and planning and figuring out that will happen between now and between that June adoption, well, the May adoption by the school committee and the June adoption by the city council. So that is the timeline. And questions. I feel like we just threw a lot at you. And so if you have questions for Steve or for me, the floor is open.
Then we're going to make you work. But the first questions, do you want to ask you?
Sorry if I missed it. You said it earlier. What's the percentage of the current budget that is that ESSER funding?
Oh, that is a good question.
Excuse me, can you repeat it?
Yes. Thank you, Mary. That's good.
What percentage of the current budget is the ESSER funding that's going away?
Thank you.
We've been spending it over a few years. There was ESSER 1, 2, and 3. We're on ESSER 3 now. It was $15 million total. So we spend, I don't know, $2 to $3 million in a year on 68 million, so 5% or less.
And a big percentage of that is pre-K.
That was going to be my question. I know you mentioned pre-K. What else is it paying for that might, that you're worried that we might?
Yeah, I mean, it's paying for a lot of tutoring supports. We've also used it for some interventions, behavioral interventionists that schools have that they didn't necessarily have before. We've used it. Do you want to jump in there?
For summer programming, last year we increased our summer programming, and it was summer programming with lots of supports, both behavioral and academic, and social emotional. So that was a huge. We've done lots of vacation academies. We've added a lot of after school programming. The summer programming here at the high school, really, there was lots of different options. So that's a big bucket item as well.
Classroom materials and supplies, play-based learning kits, a lot for early childhood, but not exclusively to early childhood.
Some of it has gone to facility. I mean, we had all the COVID supplies, at least initially. All the HEPA filters that we've bought, a lot of it has gone to those things. I mean, it goes quickly, but the
some
bulk
of our
is
professional development partners, some of the anti-racist work that we've done with the equity imperative has been paid out of that.
And the guiding theme of it is what will help our kids recover from the pandemic? And so all of the behavioral interventions, the enrichment, the summer learning, the tutoring, the adults in the building having more tools are all part of that.
We did a lot of pipeline stuff too, so to
Yeah.
go back to your budget priorities around diversifying our workforce and recruiting
Yeah.
and retaining candidates of color, bilingual candidates, so there's been a lot of pipeline work has been on ESSER as well.
And one of the advantages is it's been flexible dollars.
Some of the new curriculum that we
Yeah, the
adopted.
bulk though, I mean,
Literacy.
pre-K is over $1 million a year. Just to, the 4 classrooms we open, we're also supporting some of the community-based partners. So that's a big chunk of where the money has gone.
Other questions?
Did you have a question over here, Lisa?
I have a list,
Oh,
so I can,
okay.
A list of questions.
yes,
Excellent.
some are big, some are small, so, I was wondering if there were any changes with New Liberty and the alternative high schools being at the mall, and I know that's a significant expense, the lease there, if that's gonna be renewed or not, and what the budget impact would be.
Do you want us to take it one at a time?
Sure, maybe that's easier.
So the question was about New Liberty and Salem Prep that are currently housed in the mall. We are exploring our options. We have a lease that goes through September, August or September of this year. And so we're looking at what our options are and prioritizing a space that is first and foremost good for learning and good for kids. If that space also is affordable and nearby to the high school, so we can do programming together, and career and technical learning together, all the better, but we're exploring our options.
There's a request for proposals up now, and it closes March 2nd.
Third.
March
So
3rd.
that could be a savings or an increased expense?
It could be.
TBD.
Yeah, TBD.
On
I,
that question though, so I mean, if we have under enrollment and there's a lot of empty space, like why, I guess I'm confused why you're renting.
Why New Liberty and Salem Prep are not there?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things. They cannot be, by Salem Prep's, it's not a charter, but their organizational plan with the Department of Education as an out-of-district, as a private
Therapeutic day school.
day school requires that they not be on the same campus as the high school. And they can't be co-located with the high school. And the same had been, I mean, the history is you don't typically have alternative high schools like New Liberty on the same campus as the high school, because many of those students really struggled in that particular space before. And I don't think it's we would have maybe some space at Collins, but it's not appropriate for them to be, they can't be with younger students either. So I think the goal, I know the goal is that when we have a new facility here and we can do some reconfiguration, we bring those schools back into our portfolio in some place that we use an existing building, because we don't have space in all the right, we have a lot of space. The most space is here, right? And those 2 schools really can't come here. And so that's where it's a little tricky. That's where we have really the most space. But that could look different depending on what the configuration is of the new school. But it is, I agree, like we're spending a lot in lease payment for the 2 facilities that could, so it's tricky. I mean, those schools do have play a significant role in this district, and I'm very happy that we have alternative options for kids that don't work in the high school. We don't have enough of those options at the middle school level. So I think Salem's fortunate that they do have them at the high school level, and I wouldn't want to lose them, but it is at a significant cost. And I will say that we are also watching carefully, because we do spend a lot of money in those 2 schools, and I want to make sure they're serving enough of our students to justify the expenditure at those 2 schools.
Do you have a question number 2?
yes, I was wondering if there have been any, and I know the answer is no, but any post-COVID savings, like we had significant nursing costs that rose during COVID, and HVAC and cleaning, is that just all absorbed into the cost of living being higher, the cost of everything being higher, or
It's such a good question. So the question was, have we realized any post-COVID savings because we were investing in extra cleaning, extra HVAC, extra nurses? I think the short answer, and I'll be curious to know how you would answer this question, I think the short answer is no. We have not realized post-COVID savings for a couple of reasons. One, we're still circulating as much air as we were in the pandemic. So from an HVAC perspective, we're not post-COVID. We're still circulating, running air filtration at higher rates than we were before the pandemic. So we haven't realized savings there. Nurses, no, although, you know, on the margins, we spent less on substitute nurses, for example, but that is a very minor cost. So we haven't yet seen anything, but I think it's a question to ask as we go forward. Steve, I don't know if you would add or edit.
I just think also the cost of doing business has really escalated everywhere. I mean, our electricity costs are way up, I think. You know, we're also interpreting and translating a lot more than we ever have before. That's a good thing that those are rising costs.
Actually, here's another one. I think you asked about cleaning supplies. The cost of our cleaning supplies have increased, and are unlikely to decrease, so.
Yeah, so I don't have good news on, I mean.
I figured,
Yeah.
but,
Question number 3?
I was wondering about the timing of the vote on the budget being the day before us having a new school committee chair, and if that was intentional or thoughtful, or just the way the calendar fell, or?
I will defer to my colleagues on the school committee, but I do not believe that was intentional as in getting it in before the election. I think that was the way the calendar fell, but if there's more to the story, I would invite my colleagues to weigh in on that.
Mayor, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe there was an intent, behind it.
Not much.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
There was a school committee meeting
I think it's more about keeping to the timeline that we've had before.
Of the council.
Yeah,
We have to have it through the council.
yeah, right. The timing, if we wait too much longer, well, I think the problem is then we won't get it to the city council on time, to your point, right?
And I think we have to turn it over to the city by like May 19th. And there was a school committee meeting scheduled for May 15th, so I appreciate it.
And I will say the acting mayor is really gonna be the one that drives this budget, because with and not him by himself, but the finance person at the city and him, because so much of the planning is happening, the discussions are now. The new mayor is not, even, there would be no way for the new mayor to be involved, because so much of the budget conversation happens before May, and the school committee has to get it, a few weeks before that, and all of those conversations with the city are gonna happen with the current Mayor McCarthy, so.
I have 2 income questions. I didn't see school choice on the revenue side, and I just was wondering if that's a small enough number and that's why you didn't include it in the big category, and whether that revenue was up or down. And then a bigger question, I know there's been a lot of discussion about the Chapter 70 formula and how it's unfair to Salem. We're portrayed as being wealthy,
Yeah.
so we get less money, but obviously we're not. If there's thought that there would be some solution, or, some improvement to that for this year, or if the hope is for next year, or.
So we'll start with school choice. I did not include it because relative to the contributions from Salem and from the federal government and to ESSER, it's modest. It's much more modest than those. It's, we might get $1 million. So it's certainly not nothing, and it's very helpful funding to get. School choice is money that we receive for students who choice into Salem, and the money has to be spent for the benefit of the students in Salem. And so it's really valuable dollars. We're grateful for it, but that's why I didn't include it, just on the scale of the other
But
investments.
I would just add to that, this is a kind of a newer phenomenon, because we opened up to more school choice, and I think we're trying to wrap our heads around how much we can predict to get for school choice, and then how we're gonna use that revenue. It is not an insignificant amount, insignificant when you talk about a large budget, but it could very well help us to do some, that's one of the reasons we opened up to school choice. We did close it earlier this year because we were getting people coming at all different times. So I don't really have yet a good sense of what's predictable year upon year, but it is more revenue than we've received
Yeah.
historically. And so it does provide, I think it's a good question in terms of like strategically how we use it year to year. So, yeah, I think I don't have a good answer yet because I still want to see what that looks like moving forward. And we do lose kids to school choice as well. But our numbers have really climbed in school choice, which is a good thing. And we're doing a better job, I think, of recording, who our school choice students are.
Do you want to talk about the Student Opportunity Act?
Yeah, so the Opportunity Act, I mean, the good news is that Manny Cruz is the state rep who understands this very, very well as the school committee rep, as being on the school committee. I think Manny is working on, I think there's conversations about whether there can be a pothole, supplement for communities like Salem as early as this year. Now, I'm not overly optimistic, but Manny seems to think that there is some movement, and obviously former Mayor Driscoll understands the predicament that we're in, and so we've had some conversations with some other communities who are in similar positions as Salem, Malden being one of them, who is high need, but has perceived, as Elizabeth said, to have more means. I think something's gonna happen. Now, whether it will happen this year in time, I don't know. Manny's really caring, and I would say Senator Lovely as well, and feel free to drop them a line. I would say, Ann, maybe the STU could drop them a line again. Okay, good. The more that we push for that, and I do know that Manny is really advocating for this because he understands it in a way that maybe a lot of other state reps wouldn't because he's been on the school committee, and so it's hard to tell what's going to happen. I don't see that the formula is going to change. Certainly don't see that for this year. What I could see is that there may be some earmark or pothole that comes to communities like Salem and Malden. And there are a lot of rural communities and actually more sort of middle-class communities that are really upset right now. And you may have seen, like Marblehead is already, they're not a middle-class community, but they've already talked about how many teachers they have to lay off because and there's a lot of complaint that these communities are carrying too much of the burden. I would say we have a lot more to complain about because our population is way needier than some of those other, communities. So I would just stay tuned. That certainly would make this whole budget process a lot different if we could count on that additional funding.
Right, and so where we are now, knowing our expenses but not knowing our revenue, we're erring on the
Yep.
side of caution.
And what's the role of the millionaire's tax? That's another question that's out there, like where is that money going? And do you know where that money's going?
It's supposed to go to education and transportation.
Right, but education could be early ed, or it could be higher ed, so there's a lot of discussion about where that funding is gonna go for the
So
millionaire's
people
tax.
should pay attention to the new Thrive Act.
So they're gonna-
Thrive
yeah.
Act is the next one that we'll be focused on.
I have one last
Okay.
question, which maybe you can't answer yet, but do you know what increase we would need for a level service budget?
I don't quite know that yet, because the schools are still looking at their budgets. We have a sense of what the personnel costs might be, but we don't yet have all of the information from all of the departments. We haven't yet said, okay, are we fully meeting the needs of our students? So I'm not sure that I would have that number quite yet.
Yeah, I don't know for sure. It's gonna be hard to keep a level service budget based on what I believe we're gonna get. And we're gonna do our best to be level service, but it's tough to tell without knowing what the state is gonna give us. And how much our increase in enrollment has mattered. I'm hopeful, like the number of kids in the CTE programs has grown a lot. You get different incrementals through Chapter 74, which is vocational funding, and we're claiming many, many more kids because we do have many more kids in our CTE programs here. That should represent additional funding. So until I see those cherry sheets that come out, it's hard to know because, the city is facing some of the same. You were part of what some of the conversations were last year. I'm not sure the city can do much more than what they have done, what they did last year for the schools. So a lot of it's gonna depend on what comes from the governor.
And we should know that in very early March.
Yeah.
So it's around the first week of March that we'll know what the governor's budget proposal is. So, not too much longer, but not too long.
And just one other thing that we didn't say, one of the other things that the communities are gonna start hearing complaining about is that the cost of out-of-district private placements is projected to go up 14%, which is enormous. And those schools already cost a lot. I'm not disparaging the need for special education students who need that, but we've also seen a rise in students who need extra support. And our numbers have gone up, not surprisingly, for kids that need additional therapeutic supports than what we can provide here. And so that has us concerned too, as we look at tuitions, that could go up 14% for the private schools is a big, and there's a group of North Shore superintendents that just penned a letter to the governor, and they asked me to call Kim Driscoll about it, which is just to say, like, that we gotta control those costs. That's gonna blow out many budgets for a lot of communities. And so that's something that you'll hear a lot in this cycle, this budget cycle, about those costs, which is really, I've never seen increases like that before, so. All right. Any other questions? We want to go actually to this conversation, and we're going to ask probably to break up into two groups. Maybe Kate, you can take a group, and Elizabeth can take another group. And these are the two questions we'd love for you to discuss in your group, and maybe the staff members can split up, from parents, a little majority of you are staff members. Some of you are parents and staff members. But what are you unwilling to give up that we currently invest in as a district? Like, we want to hear, like, what are the things that you absolutely, we can never not lose? Whatever that may be. It could be class sizes, it could be programs, whatever that may be. We want to hear from you about that. And then this is we really want you to think about what things would you like us to see that we maybe don't currently have, that you'd like to see us divert resources to. So, because we're telling you that there's not like a windfall of new cash falling in, but how can we use some of our existing resources to prioritize things that you think in this moment in time our kids really need in schools? All right, people got that? And then we're going to debrief for the last 10 minutes or so. All right, so maybe half of the people can go over here, and half, Kate, you'll take half. And we'll chart out. Looking forward to hearing what people have to say.
That's important.
Or anything close to that. That's true.
So we talked about what we would be unwilling to give up, and the first thing, without even a moment's hesitation, was behavioral specialists. That was the first vote that sort of came out, and after that, I would say we did not prioritize the comments that we made, but we spent a lot of time talking about extracurricular activities for students, CTE, band and music, libraries, and enriching culturally relevant books in different languages, that are new titles, that are books like you would see in a bookstore, and all of the things that add to a student experience is what we can't live without. So we talked about that. We can't live without teachers. We cannot live without the pipelines that are being built to recruit new teachers. In particular, we talked about bringing in teachers who look like our students, and we talked about bringing in teachers who know Salem, so bringing in teachers who came through the system and stayed. We talked a lot about keeping our advanced coursework, and what a privilege that is to have that in this school, but thinking about how we fill the courses. So if we have a lot of advanced courses with very few kids, how do we get more kids in them? Is that a scheduling thing? Do we have to cull the number of classes, but get more kids to take them? So those are the things we can't live without. We did wonder if we could start thinking about our space and how we use that smartly, even in advance of building a new facility here. When we talk about what we would divert money towards, professional development for performing arts teachers sounds sounded like something that we have underinvested in as a district, more in-house PD. And again, we talked about drawing kids in through choice or back from Essex Tech with the programs that they want. So both in CTE, but also band and drama and the other elements that make an rich experience. And then we spent a lot of time talking about libraries and the importance of them to a child's development, updating the collections, and if possible, adding a certified librarian at the elementary grades so that the elementary grades could benefit the things that are only available to certified librarians, like some of the professional memberships, the ebooks and learning, and some of the ordering that are available only to certified librarians. So, group, did I leave anything out?
No.
Okay, that's what we talked about.
All right, thank you, Group 1. Group 1A.
My friend is going to present, and I'm going to be her prop holder.
So someone said we should just say ditto to what they said. It's a very similar list. Not willing to give up small class size. We talked a little bit about what that means. It means smaller than what the state thinks is okay. Continuing pre-K, even though it's expensive and we're not sure how we're gonna pay for it, seems important. We also talked about diverse staff and bilingual staff and what that looks like. And we were told there are stipends for passing the bilingual test. Congratulations, by the way.
I don't know who let me pass, but okay.
We also talked about the continued need for behavior specialists. I don't know how our schools would function without that.
Communication.
Dean of,
Yeah,
I'm gonna assume that means students.
Yes.
And I spoke about our experience with City Connects being an important program, at least at my child's school, and wanting that to continue as a resource. Continued communication investments, which have been great over the last few years, and we would not want to see that change. And including translation and interpretation as that need increases. Cartwheel, health teachers, and CTE at the high school.
So that was that, and then other priorities were?
Supports for behavior, which continues to be a challenge post-COVID. One suggestion, dream, would be a para in every classroom. We also had a lengthy discussion about libraries, both updating the collections and access. So libraries need to be staffed. If we have a library full of books, but kids can't access it, that's just no good. And Mary pointed out, I'm sorry, I called you out, additional education on research methods, determining primary sources, etc. Other things that happen in a library setting aside from just books. And I actually pointed this last bullet out about the cost here that might not exist in wealthier communities, about books that don't come back, and maybe they don't come back because they're needed at home. So because of that, we probably need to invest in buying new books, since we have books that don't make their way back. So that's very similar.
Great, thank you very much. So it's almost 8 o'clock, and I want some very important ideas. We're going to do this again virtually. I'm also going to offer one for the staff as well. I mean, staff members, you can come back to that one as well. It will be very similar. We have set up an email address for people to send additional thoughts and suggestions at spsbudget@salemk12.org for people to take ideas. Just as a reminder, all the budget finance subcommittee meetings are public meetings. People are free to attend those meetings and be there to listen to the conversations that we have with schools, and then as the school committee deliberates on our budget proposal for the upcoming school year. So as Elizabeth mentioned, this is the process from February to May. So there's a lot to happen. This is the first real community outreach, but there's going to be plenty of opportunities to engage in the coming weeks and months before a finalized budget happens. So, and the school committee there'll be a budget hearing. You can also come to public comment and share your ideas as well. You know, we obviously heard a lot tonight about libraries, about behavior specialists. You know, a lot of the, it seemed like there was some, we do have librarian folks on either team, but there was some similarities in what people said. And so I do appreciate the fact that people came out tonight to give us some input. So thank you very much. We're also filming this. We're going to post this online with the slides, so you can feel free to share with other folks who were not able to be here tonight. So thank you very much. Have a great evening. Enjoy the vacation for those of you that get a vacation in the coming, for next week. So thank you, and have a great night. Thanks.
Good night to you.